Okay, this video is called Sex, Death and Yoga. Mark Walsh, nice to see you again. So, death. Death is a major taboo. I love taboos. I've always been drawn to taboos. It's kind of the provocative nature I have. And death is a big one. And yoga does look at death, yeah? We have something called corpse pose. There's a way in which yoga traditionally certainly looked at death. You know, it was maybe like, doing yoga in the grounds full of rotting corpses, It's, I think there's probably something in many of these mythological kind of stories, but there's definitely something in there. And there's people today who still practice yoga surrounded by dead bodies or in graveyards, for example, yeah? So the taboo of death in the Western world, we tend to hide death away, it's hidden. We don't really see dead people, no one talks about death. We even have like special language, they passed away. It's like, they're dead, yeah? Maybe there's a heaven or something, but they're dead. So we tend not to avoid death. And I think that's a real problem because awareness of our mortality, awareness of death, brings us closer to life. Yeah, when I do work around purpose with people, this is one of the main things I do. If you Google Mark Walsh death meditation, you'll find a really good method for doing that. Embodied yoga, I actually do that. I do Shavasana as a death meditation. And it brings people closer to what they're here for. It also makes people more grateful. It's like, I've almost died several times, and afterwards I've always gone, wow, I'm so happy to be alive. It's like food tastes better and everything looks good and you're not resentful and it's like you're grateful. Like this awareness of the finiteness of something makes you appreciate it, and that includes life, yeah? So values you get closer to, purpose, it just makes me more loving. It's like you hug your husband or wife a little tighter after a near-miss car crash. Yeah? It makes you more loving, more grateful, more on purpose. It's more focused and more easygoing at the same time. I remember for a year, my mum had a run-in with a brain tumor and survived and was fine, but for about a year after, she was so zen. Like nothing could touch her. She was just like, everything's fine, it's all cool. She was so nice and faded, and she got back into normal mode. Love you. But for a year, she was like the zen master. It was incredible. And that's to me, what closeness and awareness to death brings. And I think we can bring it into yoga, be aware. As you take a breath, that could be your last one. You literally don't know. Yeah, I like to say at the beginning of my classes, this class or this workshop will bring you 4 hours closer to your death. How do you feel about that? The cameraman's heard me do that a number of times, actually. And I'll say, how do you feel about that? Like, what do you want to get out of this class? This class that will bring you 8 hours closer to your death, or whatever it is. And people laugh, and I just keep a straight face. And I bring that awareness to people, because it's like, don't fucking waste my time or yours. Don't mess around, yeah? So awareness of death, Shavasana, this is something we can do in yoga, though I think it goes a little bit against the whole sort of love and light, and yoga's all about life and love, and it's like, yeah, it is about life and love, but it's also about death. So that other side, the dark and the light, bring that back in. So what are the other taboos that we don't talk about? There's three big ones. Sex, money, and power. No rock and roll, that was just a fun title. Sex, people tend not to talk about in yoga unless they're doing kind of creepy neo-tantra. I tend not to see teachers even mention sex, like it doesn't exist. And I'm like, well, why not? It's just part of life, give it its place, I was doing this back bend and I was like, oh my God, this is like a bit orgasmic, and that's the energy of it. And everyone's like, I'm like, well, come on guys, you're all adults. Like the vast majority of people have had sex. It's not a big deal. You know what an orgasm is, yeah? It was just the best analogy. It was just an obvious thing that happens when you put the head back. It was like, yeah, what's the big deal? So being able to bring sex in, sexual awareness, working with that, and I'm not suggesting we should all be hooking up and having an orgy in yoga class, but sometimes I just walk in and there's beautiful women around me and I just go, whew, I just enjoy it. It's like that feeling of like, the male sexual part of me just coming alive. And then, I might just breathe and let go of that because of the context and what's appropriate, the ethics, etc. But to be aware of that part without repressing it. I sometimes find yoga a little sexually repressive, or just the other side of things is completely permissive and just like blah, spurting everywhere, jizzing and fucking energy everywhere. So that's the other side of it that can kind of come out the other way. But just looking at sex as part of life, so part of yoga. Power, a lot of yoga is about feeling powerful. All those downwards dogs and chaturangas is like, bah! And I see power do funny things to yoga teachers as well. It's kind of a funny environment, isn't it? Where I go and I'm like a little dictator and I tell everyone what to do. And if I just told you like how to sit and how to breathe now, you'd be like, what the fuck, So it's like power, I think we need to address a little bit more clearly. And in a way, like we can look at different types of power, like cognitive power, spiritual power, emotional power, sexual power. It's one model for a kind of chakra thing. But just power generally, I think, is really disowned in yoga. There's this model, this sort of very fascist kind of power at play, this kind of that you see in the yoga world, yet everyone disowning it and being a bit teenage around power, and particularly around authority. We have a posture for that in EYP. So looking at authority, looking at power, I think is well worth looking at in a yoga context, or else again, it comes out sideways. What you repress persists, right? It just kind of pops out in weird ways. You'll see that in like the fascism of yoga, yeah? What's the other one? Money. So there's a big taboo. When I tell people in yoga, I'll ask them, what do you care about? And they'll say health and spirituality. I'll say, oh, cool, cool. And it's like nobody says their job, which is weird, because your job matters, right? Even if you don't like your job, it still matters if it's bread on the table. Gluten-free bread, obviously. So repressing money, not thinking of the financial side, and again, it comes out in weird ways. I've had some very odd run-ins with yoga people in yoga studios about money in a way that it's very not integrous, and just people demonize business around money, but I actually think it's much cleaner a lot of the time outside of the yoga world around money and looking at our relationship to money. There's good postures we work with, like receiving and giving and containing, good EYP postures that we work with the financial domain. I think it's a bigger taboo than sex. I remember there was one time I was at a Buddhist festival, and I was kind of around a campfire, about 10, 12 people. And I said, when was the last time you had sex? And people said, last week, last year, whatever. Oh, no big deal. A little bit of embarrassment from a couple, but pretty much no big deal. And I said, how much money is in your bank account? Nobody answered. People were refusing. They were, sort of getting upset about it. They were making reasons why they wouldn't answer. I was like, guys, it's not a big deal. I'm just asking how much money is in your bank account, And people just literally refused. And I thought, and that was the moment I went, wow, money's a really big taboo. And that's partly a British thing. The Americans are a bit different cultures, But I thought that was fascinating, yeah? So bringing the awareness of money into how we are in yoga, and that could just be like when you pay at the beginning of class, for example, let's say you go to a class where you pay every time, are you resentful? Or are you like trying not to look at the money and thinking, oh, that's not spiritual, I want to get into yoga quickly? Are you taking the concessions rate kind of unnecessarily when it's not really your place to? What is your relationship to the giving? Do you put extra money in the bowl for the teacher or for the studio or whatever it is, So looking at that relationship, because you are spending money in yoga, so you might as well use that as an opportunity. So we've got death, we've got the taboos. I think it's worth looking at them in yoga so they don't come out in weird ways, which is what I see in the yoga community around money, sex, and power. It just comes out in unpleasant, unethical ways, so it's worth bringing in a little bit. It's kind of a tantra, but it doesn't have to be like a hardcore, what you might think of. When you say the word tantra these days, you start thinking of orgies and stuff. But just bringing a little bit of that into yoga, I think, could be very helpful. So I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, you can subscribe to the channel, hit the bell. More importantly, however, get the newsletter. So the newsletter you do, is that right? In the box here? Okay. So why you would want the newsletter, so you hear about the best videos, so you actually ask me questions, you can reply to the newsletter, I'll reply. You can hear about events, teacher trainings, other things that are happening, and stay in touch more reliably. So newsletter there.